Lyndsey is an experienced pediatric nurse, health visitor, international board certified lactation consultant, a holistic sleep coach, and a birth trauma recovery practitioner with almost 20 years experience working with infants, children, and families in hospitals, clinics, and in the community. She runs a busy practice offering one-to-one special help with breastfeeding, with bottle feeding, sleep, eating behavior, and parenting support to families in the UK and internationally, as well as an online training program for health and childcare professionals. She is the author of Holistic Sleep Coaching and respected teacher, trainer, and mentor. She is also hosting the Holistic Sleep Conference on March 9th and March 10th in the UK. It is being held in London, but don't worry if you cannot attend in person, as you do have a chance to attend in live stream, and we will talk about that afterwards. So stay tuned at the end of the show, and we will talk more about it, and Lyndsey will give us a little bit more information about who's speaking and what they will be speaking about. So what I wanted to do was have that lovely introduction for you, Lyndsey, and then I would love for you to share just some of the personal information about yourself that we may not know that will help us to get to know you a little bit better. And usually it's just like kind of the family you grew up in, where you grew up with, and that just gives us a little insight to that.
Sure. So I guess I always start by just reassuring people that I'm passionate about sleep, but I am definitely even more passionate about mental health and supporting parents in their parenting journey, and with attachment parenting, gentle parenting, being respectful to the breastfeeding relationship. I was a IBCLC before I was a sleep coach, so that's definitely kind of my first love. And the work that I do is definitely not about getting babies to get into strict routines or drop night feeds or sleep through the night at some impossibly early age. So the work that I do is based on what's normal for infants and older children as they get older, and as they develop, and as they develop their own kind of personalities as well. So that's just really important to just lay on the line straight away so everybody can relax. I'm not going to be talking about leaving babies to cry for any length of time at any age. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yes, it does. I think I've already told you privately that, I'm just not thrilled about all of the sleep training and coaching programs, because typically they do rely on activities for parents to do that cause their babies what I feel to be in distress, and the parents to be in distress, and to have feedings be less and less frequent. And that has detrimental effects on the breastfeeding, the milk supply, and babies' weight gain. And so the last thing that I wanted to do was, my listeners have someone on the show that was going to be having some very strict training program on making that happen. And when your book got a high five from several people, Kathleen Kendall Tackett and Laura Wilson also loved the book, and Dr. Amy Brown and Fiona Lang Sharp. So peers of mine's, IBCLC, who I know put the breastfeeding relationship way up at the top of the list. Then I decided to check out your book, and I loved it, and here you are. So, but thank you for letting my audience know that right off the bat, because otherwise they might do what I might otherwise do, is just kind of shut it off. Like, I am so not into that. But we're going to hear a little bit about your breastfeeding relationship with your two girls, and then you're going to tell us about the coaching program and the conference, one that I am actually very excited about, because I do love your approach, and we're going to get to hear more about that. Let's start off by hearing a little bit about the family that you grew up in and how you grew up.
Okay, so I might have a very British accent, but I actually don't consider myself to be a typical Brit. So I grew up in a military family. My father was a military GP, and my mum was a teacher, a primary school teacher, and they got married very young, and I arrived, a year later. they were about 21. And this was in the very early 80s, 1982, when breastfeeding rates in the UK were pretty appalling, actually. And we subsequently moved around Europe. We lived in the Far East, and then we came back to another part of the UK. So I didn't really live in the UK till I was about 10 years old, and I had 2 younger sisters by that point. I studied and lived in London for nearly 20 years, and now we live in rural Devon, which is idyllic and blissful. And if you've ever watched Poldark or Doc Martin, that's kind of where I now hail from. So if that helps you to place me in any way, that might help. But in terms of my own breastfeeding journeys with my girls, I was one of these people that was determined to breastfeed. It really didn't occur to me that there was another choice that was important for me. And I, as a lactation consultant and as a health professional, I wouldn't dream of judging or being, unkind about anybody else's personal feeding choices. But that was my feeding choice, and it was important to me. And so we started off with our firstborn, and she ended up naturally weaning when she was 3. So she had her final breastfeed on her 3rd birthday, which was special. And she was a fabulous baby. She was great fun and had a lot of personality right from the get-go. But she was very alert. She was a pretty difficult sleeper. I'll come back to that. And we definitely had a breastfeeding relationship that I made more complicated because of my own anxieties about breastfeeding. So I was so determined to breastfeed, and my biggest fear was not having enough milk. And so anytime after I felt she hadn't had a particularly effective feed, I don't even know what assessment I was using to make that kind of judgment about her feeds. But if I deemed it to be not very good, which was most feeds, I have to say, I would pump after those feeds. And she used to spit up a lot. People tried to diagnose her with reflux. I resisted that diagnosis because she was happy. She was gaining 300 or 400 grams a week. For you folks in the US, that's about 12 to 13 ounces that she was piling on a week. Sometimes she even put on a pound a week. It was insane. It was nuts. And my biggest fear was not having enough milk. And I began to train as a lactation consultant pretty late into our breastfeeding journey, but it wasn't completely too late for me to realize that what I'd gone and done was give myself a massive oversupply through my own anxieties and insecurities. So, that's an interesting journey and an interesting experience first time around, and definitely made our lives unnecessarily harder. It didn't need to be that difficult. I definitely made it harder for myself.
When you were taking the class on the road to becoming an IBCLC, I know what happened with me, which was I was well past breastfeeding at that point, but I took the class with it was like an entry-level class, like the 90-hour class, and I took it with about 50 other people. And a couple of them I was friends with, most of them I wasn't. But the ones that I was friends with, I cannot tell you how many times we were like elbowing each other during the class saying, what? Is that what that was? That was oversupply I was dealing with? Or, oh my goodness, I thought that everything was fine with the latch, but my baby kept falling off, and now I'm learning something different, and that shouldn't have happened. And each one of us, we were really good during the class time, but once it came to lunchtime, we were like talking about each of our experiences, and there was so many light bulbs that went off with those of us, especially the ones who we were breastfeeding years were behind us. But it was fabulous for people who were still breastfeeding because they started to learn so much about the early days of breastfeeding and even pumping and all kinds of stuff. And so even to learn about how do you know when your baby is satiated? And so I don't know, and I don't even know if you remember, but one of the things that one of the women said was because she did something similar to you, she was so paranoid. And she knows where that came from because she had a couple of girlfriends who didn't make enough milk. So she was incredibly vigilant for that purpose and thinking more about the girlfriends and their babies rather than what was right in front of her. So she was pumping after every feeding. And she decided that if her child moved their arm or finger or head or anything, that they were not full. So they had to just be in that total milk drunk coma state, not moving any part of their muscle or anything. And if that happened, she deemed them not full, which once you get past that first week or two, that happens after feedings. They're full, but they're still maybe looking around or having a little bit of activity, they're not fussing, which meant that she did something very similar to you. So I'm laughing thinking about that course. And I even remember her name. It was Leslie. She did something similar to you, and she wound up with all kinds of clogged ducts and all kinds of stuff. So I don't know if that happened to you other than just having an abundant supply that made your breast uncomfortable all the time.
Yeah, well, yeah, I can definitely relate. And I just don't think I trusted my body. Before we had our eldest, I lost about 4 pregnancies, and I think I just didn't really trust my body. I thought, well, if it's, you know, I haven't really nailed the whole pregnancy thing very well, and I had preeclampsia with my eldest, so I felt like I hadn't really nailed birth really either, and labor. I thought, well, probably my body will let me down during lactation as well. So I just don't think I really trusted my body. But what I could have done was trust my baby, and I didn't do that either. So
Well,
I'm very...
yeah, you just explained some. Actually, it's always interesting to talk to moms and find out where that thinking came from. But you just, you know, 4 excellent reasons why you would think that your body isn't working and let you down. And you're just trying to be the best mother you can. So you are incredibly vigilant, making sure that you keep up that supply. But I'm laughing because you're telling me how much that's like twice as much as we would expect. So she must have been pretty plump.
She was a chubster when she was little, and she'd be done, you know, after 5 minutes of feeding, she would not have any more milk. She was cooked, but I was desperately trying to feed her more. It was ridiculous. And then I would pump, and I'd take fenugreek, and she would throw up, and really, really silly situation. And I remember she didn't take a bottle, partly because I didn't want her to take a bottle, because the other fear I had was that she just wouldn't breastfeed. I didn't want her to be on the bottle. I wanted to breastfeed her. I was only pumping to maintain my supply that I didn't have a problem with in the first place. So I ended up with this massive freezer stash, which I ended up donating to the local NICU. But it was just I learned a lot from that experience, which was
all those NICU babies benefited. So there is a huge meaning to that.
Exactly. And they wouldn't have had it from me otherwise, because I really wasn't that into pumping, but I felt that it was important and necessary, even though it wasn't. But I studied for the IBCLC when she was about 18 months. And I eventually passed it when she was, I think she was about 2, and she was still feeding. She breastfed morning and night pretty much until she was about 3, and it just petered out. I was pregnant with her sister, and it ended very calmly, without any drama, any fuss on either of our parts, which was really nice. I'm really grateful for that.
That is. So she lost interest during your pregnancy. So I'm interested to learn at that point, what, if anything, did you do different with breastfeeding and or pumping after your second was born?
So second baby, well, she was a very different baby for a start. So you know how there are babies who the second they're hungry, they're like, I'm starving now, you incompetent fools, you need to feed me like 5 minutes ago. And that was kind of like my eldest. My second baby, I would think, oh my goodness, it's been a while since she's fed. I'd better just go and check on her, just, you know, make sure she's all right. And she'd be lying there. We had this little hammock that she slept in. She didn't have a crib. She had this really cute hammock. And she'd be lying in her hammock, eyes open, you know, just gurgling to herself, almost as if she was saying, you know, I could do with a feed, mummy, but it's fine. Go have a shower, start dinner, deal with my big sister, whatever. I'm totally chilled here. So she was literally born like that. Her name actually means blissfully happy, and she kind of defined it from the word go. So she was a much easier baby to feed in that respect, because she was easy to read, and I didn't have any problem. Maybe just second baby, more confident. I'd been a lactation consultant longer. Who knows, probably a combination. But she was also a chubby baby, but she didn't vomit ever, and I didn't pump, and I didn't even bother trying to give her a bottle. I just couldn't be bothered with it. And it was a very different breastfeeding experience. When I did return to work, I did a little bit of work when she was about 6 months old. I tried to pump while I was absent from her, and I found ridiculously that I could barely pump a drop. With her eldest sister, I was able to pump about 500 mils, which is about a pint. I could pump a pint in about 25 minutes. And with baby number 2, I was lucky if I pumped an ounce. Crazy, huh?
Yeah, one of my old bosses used to say that women tend to bond with their pumps. And so I'm thinking you were really, really bonded to your pump the first time, because you probably saw that as your lifeline. The second time, it's like, later for the pump, I don't need you. And it's all about the baby, and you don't want to pump. You don't have an interest in pumping. You don't think it's really going to do much for you. And
No.
so, you know, then at a certain point, you need to pump. And you know, I don't know, maybe other things were in play, but that actually happens a lot. And you obviously know that you have milk because your baby's chunking out, right? So I think that there's definitely that mind-body experience going on too.
For sure. And I just, you know, I didn't have time to pump. I had 2 little girls to look after by that time, so it worked out fine. And you know, I'm a big believer that no experience is wasted experience. I'm really grateful for 2 different breastfeeding journeys, and I've had different challenges with breastfeeding child number 2, because she was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 3.5, and I was actually quite interested in stopping breastfeeding just a little while before she was diagnosed, and I'm so grateful that I didn't, because she ended up being extremely sick. So unusually for childhood leukemia, she actually presented with sepsis. So she became critically unwell almost overnight. She was, I'm not going to get this right in Fahrenheit, but she was 41.5 degrees centigrade, which is just about as hot as you can record for a human. And she was cold from the waist down and unresponsive. It was pretty scary times, but she did, thankfully, she did still breastfeed. You know, they obviously needed to give her fluids and oxygen and all sorts of stuff, but she carried on breastfeeding, and we're almost through with treatment, I'm happy to say. So we've just done 26 months of chemotherapy, and she's doing really, really well. And she spontaneously stopped breastfeeding about 3 months ago. So she's breastfed through nearly the whole of her cancer treatment. And, you know, I don't know, my experience is that she's tolerated a lot of the really high dose toxic chemotherapy really well. She hasn't had any of the mouth ulcers that we were pretty much promised that we would get. And, you know, even times when she hasn't eaten very well and she's lost a little bit of weight, she's carried on breastfeeding, and that's sort of avoided getting an NG tube stuck down her nose. So that made me happy as well.
Did her doctors talk about that at all? Were they surprised at how well she was doing? You talked about that she didn't get ulcers that they would typically expect, and she was able, even if she wasn't able to tolerate table food, that she was able to breastfeed and tolerate that. Did they talk about the differences that they saw with her than they see with an average child with the same condition?
Well, they have. I mean, lots of people have noticed that she's got a lot of energy. She really does. And, you know, she's very resilient. She's got an incredible emotional intelligence. So even when she was little, you know, tiny, like 2, if she would drop a pencil, she would, you know, she would pick up the pencil and go, "Oh, poor you," and start kissing the pencil and, you know, show empathy. And so she's always kind of been like that. And I think, you know, when you do responsively parent, and I like to separate breastfeeding and responsive parenting, because, you know, I've met a lot of people who haven't been able to breastfeed because they've had, you know, mastectomy or horrible treatments themselves, or whatever, you know, or other reasons. You know, we're not going to get into that right now. It's not the place. But, you know, I think that I've seen some beautiful responsive parenting in isolation from breastfeeding as well. And I think breastfeeding is just a really brilliant way of practicing responsive parenting. I don't think it's the only way, but I think it is a really good way. And I think that's what the staff have noticed, that that she obviously has a huge resilience, and they've certainly noticed that she's been healthier. I don't know if anybody has been brave enough to say, "Oh, I wonder if it's because she's breastfed." But I make no secret of the fact that she is. So hopefully they've put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Tell me what breastfeeding her for that period of time meant to you emotionally.
Well, I think I've reflected on this, and I used to work in the neonatal intensive care unit promoting attachment and bonding and family-centered care in the NICU. And what I noticed so often with the parents who were pumping and trying to breastfeed in the NICU was that they felt that it was something really positive. It was something that only they could do, that they almost kind of had this superpower, that it was going to hopefully reduce the risk of their baby getting necrotizing enterocolitis and all the other stuff that premature babies are likely to get. And I think I ended up having a similar kind of thought process with breastfeeding my youngest through cancer treatment. I think I ended up thinking, gosh, actually, this is something that only I can do. This is a way that I can comfort her when she's feeling sad, when she's in pain, when she's feeling sick, or whatever it is that she's struggling with. It's something positive, it's something proactive, and maybe, just maybe, I've shielded her from a few nasty bugs that might have otherwise come her way. Who knows?
I think as a mother, you know, we're talking about breastfeeding, but also anything that we can do for our babies and children that we feel that will work in their favor, that we feel just really good over. And there are some things, even just cuddling a baby and sitting and laying in bed with them, those are just some of the things that not only that we can do, but that they want and need from us. So it's there. Like, I appreciate you saying that it's not only and just about the breastfeeding. Of course, we're huge supporters of moms who are breastfeeding and want to help them as much as we possibly can if they're struggling. But we also both know, with just being parents, and in particular you with all the work that you're doing, that that there are some women who do not want to and or just cannot want to. And the last thing we would ever want anybody to do is think that a breastfeeding mom is superior in any way, shape, or form than a mother who is not breastfeeding. If you love your baby, you're going to bond with your baby. And that is just a fact, right?
Right. 100%.
All right. So what I would love for you to do is tell me a little bit about the work that you do as that you've done leading up to this point, and how you did get involved with sleep coaching, because that's really interesting to me to know your background and what drew you to this.
Yeah. Well, So I'm really passionate about sleep, because I think for too long it's almost felt like we either promote breastfeeding and attachment and responsiveness, or we optimize sleep. There is nothing in the middle. You either prioritize sleep or breastfeeding, and that's it. And I couldn't help thinking that that's fine if you've got lots of support, if you've got the emotional internal resilience, if you've got people around you who can carry you along, if you can just relax and let your baby grow up the way they're going to grow up. All children sleep eventually, right? There's a spoiler. All of them do. Some of them take a little longer to figure it out, but they all get there in the end. So if you've got the tools, whatever those look like, to just get through it and to just, you know, maintain those responsive parenting behaviors, such as bed sharing, if that's something that that is important to you, and if you can make it as safe as possible, you know, the Safe Sleep 7 and all of those guidelines that we promote, you know, that's absolutely amazing. But I think the reason I really got into sleep was because I've got no issue with just letting babies be. And I've also, I also firmly believe that if it isn't broke, don't fix it. You know, if somebody's just looking for reassurance about their baby's sleep, that's great. I will spend half an hour on the phone to a mum who calls me up thinking that she needs the sleep coach, and I'll happily put her off and say, look, you know what, if it's not a problem for you and if you're happy with it, then, you know, have you thought about these hacks to make your life easier? Have you thought about, you know, X, Y, and Z? You don't actually have to do anything about the sleep if you don't want to. And sometimes that's great. That's all they need. They just need some validation for what they're doing.
And is part of
But
that
I've also,
coming from them being part of a group of people, friends, or family members? That whole big question is, do you have a good baby? Is he or she sleeping through the night? And then if that's not happening, then we feel like a bad mother and we feel like we need to do something. So there are parents who fit into that category that actually nothing is wrong. They're maybe a little bit tired, but they are a new parent, and that they're pretty much okay with what's going, but they're feeling society's pressures.
Absolutely. And, you know, I've got a lot of really respected colleagues that are doing some great work with this and really debunking some of those societal myths about, you know, what a good baby looks like. I think we've got a little bit of it with a good mother as well. You know, I think, or good father or good parent. You know, I think if your baby breastfeeds really well, whatever that means, and if your baby sleeps a certain length of time, you can end up feeling as a parent like you've nailed it. You've sussed this parenting gig. I don't know what all the fuss is about, but, you know, I'm superwoman here. You know, I've got it all figured out. And yet the mum who's really struggling, and actually breastfeeding's been really difficult, and she's persevered and she's tried really hard and she's got lots of support, but it's difficult to feel like you're nailing it if it's not easy. And I think we definitely have got still a lot of work to do with helping parents understand that finding things hard and finding things challenging does not mean that it's broken. It does not mean that we need to you know, change it, stop it, you know, replace it with something else. It just means that we need to find a different way of finding a solution or a different support system.
Yeah, I really like that you said that just because something is hard doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. And it means
it's true,
that
right?
it's hard and and it's upsetting to us, frustrating. If it's getting in the way of our enjoyment, then we look for ways to help ourselves make it better. But it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. I always tell moms, I'm like, just the fact that you are calling and reaching out for help and searching, that tells me that you're a wonderful mother. And they just kind of look at me and like, oh, I guess so. I'm like, yeah, because you're struggling, but you're seeking answers. You're still parenting. You're still doing everything that you need to do, but you're also searching. To me, that tells me you're a fabulous parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that there's very little in life that we just immediately get immediately. There's very little, you know, when you learn to drive a car, when you learn to walk as a kid, when you study for the IBCLC exam, you know, it's hard. It's like walking through mud sometimes, but it doesn't mean we jack it in. And I think this is where sleep and breastfeeding really do go on a parallel track, because so often if sleep is not what people expect, they look to fix it with a solution that probably doesn't have anything to do with sleep in the first place. Like, I know, let's just stop breastfeeding, or let's do a bottle of formula at night, or I don't know, let's drop night feeds. If a baby's waking more at night, why don't we drop night feeds, and then that'll make the baby sleep? Well, you know, for some babies that works, but a whole bunch of them it doesn't work. You've just lost your easiest tool to get them back to sleep again. So I think that's where we do need to think about sleep, because misunderstandings about sleep often lead people to just clutch at straws. Like they're looking for any solution that they've heard about, or they've read about, or their family members told them about, or they've Googled or whatever, and they're just you know, picking solutions, trying them, and then when they don't work, sometimes it's too late for the breastfeeding relationship. So if you've invested a couple of weeks into night weaning, for example, and it doesn't actually improve the sleep very much, what a lot of parents don't do is go back to breastfeeding at night, for example. So it's stuff like that I run into a lot. But I guess my heart...
What is a couple of things that you say to parents who you probably get phone calls like this? Okay, my baby is 3 months old and still not sleeping through the night. And, you know, one of my approaches to ask them, you know, what starts nighttime for them and when is morning time? So you want to think about what it is they think sleeping through the night is. But also, what do you tell them about normal biological sleeping for a 3-month-old? Because I think part of where we get into the trouble is with parents not understanding ahead of time what is normal for babies for sleeping, for hydrating, and the need to get calories and the size of their belly and those type of things for the early months. Because you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you don't really start with anything very specific until babies are at least 7 or 8 months old, because you understand that if they are crying to feed in the middle of the night, that we need to feed them, right? So I actually just asked you a couple of questions. So let's go back to, yeah. So
I'm trying, my brain's spinning, but I think I'm keeping up. So
let's go back to the first question about, what do you tell a parent whose baby is about 3 months old, and you deem that everything is actually going really well with breastfeeding, but they are looking to get their baby to sleep through the night?
So I'm not selling snake oil here. I'm not selling a dream of sleeping through the night at a particular age. It's not one of those. I'm not one of those people that say, look, if you follow this chart, follow this program, your baby's going to be sleeping in X number of weeks or whatever. I do occasionally work with young babies, but not to get them sleeping through the night. It's more to do with supporting parental sleep hygiene. So some of the parental sleep habits. So, for example, like if your baby is waking up 3 times in the night, it's completely normal. But if it's taking you 45 minutes to an hour to fall back to sleep after those wake-ups, that's not normal. So actually the problem is really not the infant's sleep, it's the parent's sleep. So if we could fiddle around with the parent's sleep, make that better, you know what, you might feel a whole lot better without going anywhere near your baby's sleep, because it's a lot easier to change adult behavior than it is infant behavior. So I definitely don't talk about babies sleeping through the night. I don't give any strategies at all that will potentially lengthen sleep, unless it's something that's biological. So, for example, if a baby is really overtired because they're not napping at all, in the day, sometimes that can make them wake up more frequently at night. And one of the ways to get a baby back to sleep at night is feeding them back to sleep. We all know that. But if you manage the overtiredness, what sometimes happens without us trying to do anything is the baby then starts waking up a slightly more average number of times in the night, rather than, for example, every hour or whatever. So that sometimes happens, but that's definitely not a deliberate we're going to stretch your baby out kind of thing, if that makes any sense.
Yes, and you also said something that is so important that I would love for mothers to really get from this part of the interview, which is your baby is actually waking up a normal amount of times throughout the nighttime, but it seems to me that you're having difficulty going back to sleep, and let's do a little bit of thinking and work on that. And that is actually pretty common, because what happens is moms wake up, you know, the lights are on, they might even get a bite to eat, and they start stirring themselves, and then their head is wired, and then they're thinking about the next feeding, and, you know, they're just laying there for a long time, and that's a setup. So that's very interesting thought process. And anybody who's listening to this now, if your baby isn't sleeping through the night and you're looking for it to happen, you might think about if that's something that's going on in your household. And I imagine that when you're consulting with parents, that these are the things that you're going over. And so you're raising awareness about normal sleep behavior for babies and seeing what's going on with the parents also. So I really like that you brought that up.
Yeah, well, mental health and emotional health is incredibly important. And there's so much, we can't even get into it really, but there's so much evidence around remaining calm and confident and mindful and you know, emotionally available and present, all of those things, all the buzzwords, right? There's so much information about it out there. So I often will recommend to a parent that they might just stick in some earphones, and maybe they just do a guided relaxation before their baby needs to nap, or maybe put their baby in a sling or a baby carrier. I think you guys call them strollers. In the UK, we call them prams. But, you know, you just put in a guided meditation or a relaxation, or you can listen to these affirmations as well, just to kind of build yourself up, make yourself feel better. And often what you find is if you're exuding all of this confidence and calmness and this sort of sense of being in control of, not in control of your baby's sleep, but actually just in control of your emotions, and you're able to regulate your baby's emotions. So if you're calm, you're able to say to your baby, it's okay, mummy's here, there's absolutely nothing to worry about, you can just rest, I'm here for you, if you need me, I'm around, but you don't need to get upset and stressed, because I'm right here, I'm holding you. And often what happens is these babies that were previously wired and refusing to nap will then nap, because they're getting that message that, oh, it's okay, I'm safe, mummy's here, mummy loves me, daddy's going to be around for me, or whatever. So that's really important in the early days, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, from birth, there's nothing wrong with doing the same things in the same order. There's nothing wrong with being very flexible about your sleep and feeding times and being led by your baby, but at the same time saying the same little word every single time they shut their eyes, so they begin to, you know, hear that as a sleepy cue. There's nothing you know, scary or sleep trainy about that. It's just something that might work, but it definitely won't do any harm.
So
but you're right. Sorry.
Can you tell me about, like, let's say if there's an average client who contacts you that you're saying, okay, the baby is old enough to probably start sleeping a little bit longer, and the mom is really stressed out. Would that be like an average client at about an average age that you would put some, you would offer her some really good tried and true strategies to help her work with her baby?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have a cookie cutter solution that I would use, but I would say that I have a definite bulge in clients round about kind of 8 to 15 months, I would say, is my average age. That's when in the UK, that's when a lot of parents are going back to work. So I suspect that might be part of it. But I also think that people are often quite tolerant of night feeding until about 6 or 7 months. And then there's still this idea that once they've started solids and they're on solid food, that they should start sleeping through the night, which actually isn't played out in big research studies that we can lay our hands on. I often quote a study that looked at 55,000 normal, healthy children who were all breastfed, and the average number of wake-ups between 6 and 18 months was 3. That's the average number of wake-ups. And I'm always guided by that, because I kind of think if 85% of children between 6 to 18 months are waking up on average 3 times a night, that's not pathology, because 85% of the population do not have a pathology. They just don't.
Right. With different parents in different homes in different countries and different
Yeah,
lifestyles.
doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense. So tell
Yeah.
me,
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no. So I would say that my average client is an older baby waking very frequently. So we're talking maybe every 30 to 40 minutes all night long. That's a typical kind of client. I've got 2 parents, 1 parent who, you know, whatever the situation is, but parents literally on their knees. They are absolutely exhausted. They're getting probably minutes of sleep in total in the whole night, not even just minutes in between wake ups, but minutes in total. And they've probably tried bed sharing, and that's either worked or it hasn't worked, but you know, for whatever reason, they're just not getting any sleep. And usually there's loads of stuff that we can do. And often what I will do is the easy things first. I won't go anywhere near the nights, because in my experience, if you try and do something new at night, if it's something that the baby is not as used to, or you know, doesn't find as soothing or relaxing, all that's going to happen is that exhausted parent who is literally on their last legs is going to get even less sleep than they were. So I'm condemning them to be even more wrecked than they already are. So I will always start with the days and the easy things and the stuff that you can do before, you know, 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And we shoot for that first, see what happens. Hopefully it improves the sleep even by a small degree, and it just gives them enough either motivation or enough sleep to be able to move on and do a couple of other things as well. If that makes sense.
That is an excellent point. When I'm talking to parents about breastfeeding and reclining or laying down with their baby and sleeping or doing something different, I actually do the same thing. I'm like, let's try this. So can I start this tonight? I'm like, well, you can, but it's much better to work at this during the daytime hours when you tend to be more awake than not, and the frustration level is less. So let's try it during the day. And then when it starts working during the day, then you can start to transition during the night. And it's so interesting because on one hand, it makes logical sense. I want to make this happen during the nighttime, so I'm going to work at it at the nighttime. And honestly, it's just someone like you, Lyndsey, saying to a mom, let's not try this at night. Let's try this during the day, and then explaining it. Because what you said is you can literally you're now putting pressure on something to happen during the middle of the night. You're giving them chores to do, and more than likely it's going to backfire, and you're just going to start off with things happening even worse. So that is very excellent tip. So I really like that you start off with everything during the daytime, and let's just see how it goes. I also really like what you said, which I've definitely learned from your book, because there's all the science and evidence-based research, and you talk about normal biological sleep, and you talk about, we touched on it just a tad, but the the baby and the parent who is so sleep deprived, and how that can be, a major health issue. And so I like that you are not doing things cookie cutter. And that's another thing that I like about your program, because I find others, it's how old is your baby? And here's basically a cookie cutter program, and which is typically will not work, or it will quote unquote work, but at the detriment to the emotional and physical health, as far as I'm concerned, of the mother and the baby. So then, did it really work? So you are looking for things to become better while keeping in mind the emotional and physical health of the parents and of the baby. And I just love that. Thank you so much for that.
Well, it's just about, I think, in an ideal world, we wouldn't fiddle with infant sleep at all. We would just let babies grow up at their own rate. But we just have to be a bit more realistic than that. And I guess where I'm coming from is if people who are naturally, because of their job, because of, where they're placed in the community, if people who are supporting breastfeeding or responsive bottle feeding and responsive parenting and attachment and mental health and all that stuff, if these people knew more about sleep and were able to get a few easy, gentle strategies in, then maybe parents wouldn't get so desperate that they start Googling for a sleep trainer and do cry it out when their baby is however many weeks or months old. That's really important to me, because I kind of think if we don't support these people, who some of them, are genuinely exhausted and not coping, then they will find someone who will. And I can sympathize with that.
Yeah, as a lasting thought of on this particular topic, can you tell me just a couple of things that if parents are looking for someone to help them and their baby with sleep, what are 2 or 3 things that you would want them to be looking at about the person who they're hiring to help them?
Yeah, that's such a sensible thing to ask, because a lot of people will sell themselves as using gentle strategies, and what they mean by gentle is they're not going to ask you to leave your baby to cry it out. They're going to recommend that you go and check on them every few minutes. And it's I'm not going to get into the debate about why that's still potentially harmful for babies and for attachment and everybody's mental health. But it's really important to ask some direct questions of the person that you want to support you. So you might want to ask about what their training is and what courses they've done. But even that might not reassure you, because they might have done a really extensive program of training, but actually they are still going to do controlled crying or cried out or something that you're not happy with. And you need to ask them, because you know what, there is not an easy, quick, tear-free solution that every sleep coach out there is keeping secret from you. You do not hand over your money and they're going to let you into this closely guarded secret. It doesn't exist. It doesn't. So that they should not be cagey about what sleep solution they are going to suggest to you. So if somebody calls me up, I will say, look, you're not hiring me to give you this genius idea. You could probably figure this out yourself. What you're hiring me for is my support and, for my oversight on what's going on in general during your day. And I'm going to help you unpick the naps and, support you with, how you're coping with this. But I'm not going to give you something that you couldn't Google yourself. So you definitely want to be suspicious of anybody who is going to keep that from you. Because while any solution can be tailored individually to a family, there are only so many solutions out there, right?
And so, right, if they contact you, you are not going to be promising to have their baby sleeping through the night in the next 7 days.
Sadly not. So I lose a fair few clients that way, but that's okay, because I don't want them to be disappointed in me, and I don't want to take anybody's money on false pretenses And I do a fair amount of support for free over the phone. I probably shouldn't say that publicly, but yeah, I'm not for everybody, because some people are like, no, do you know what, that's going to take way too long. I'm not up for it. I want something guaranteed. I want somebody who can guarantee my baby's going to be sleeping in however many days. I'm not okay with that. And what I tell parents is I can't make guarantees, because the one thing we can't do to another human being is force them to go to sleep against their will. The only thing we can force them to do is not tell us that there's a problem. And I'm not okay with teaching babies that we're just not going to respond if they've got a problem. I don't care if that problem is nutritional, psychological, emotional, relational, or whatever else. I don't care what the need is. If babies have got a need, we need to meet the need. So yeah, that does not come with a guarantee.
That's a big part of, I'm going to hold up your book, Holistic Sleep Coaching.
That's my second daughter, by the way, on the front cover.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's a pen and ink, a very, very talented artist friend of mine. Yeah, a small aside.
That is very beautiful. So, Holistic Sleep Coaching, Gentle Alternatives to Sleep Training for Health and Childcare Professionals by our very own Lyndsey Hookway. So, I'm working my way through this book, but again, as I said in the beginning, that I needed to get approval from several very well-respected IBCLCs. And then you graciously sent me the book, and I read just enough for me to know that I was loving what you're doing, because I do think that there are plenty of times where mothers and babies and dads and partners do need help with the whole sleep issue, but definitely not, I can get your baby to sleep in 7 days. It's not a cookie cutter. You're a large support person, and you're giving them a lot of ideas based on working with previous clients, what you've learned in your own working life, and what you've learned from the evidence. So I really appreciate that. And I think that this is a great book for parents to get. And what I want to move towards is you telling us a little bit about the conference that you have coming up, because there's a big conference coming up in March. I'm really excited about it also because it's something that is for professionals and it's for parents. And even though you're holding it close to home, that you have a live streaming aspect to it. So even if someone cannot attend in person, that there's still a way that they can get all this great information. And while nobody expects anybody to be an expert after a weekend conference, there is so much that the average parent, like you're saying, like they're just Googling and getting all these hits for all kinds of sleep training, but this is really what they want to be learning about, and that they now have access to this, to what the experts have access to. And that is one of the things that I'm a strong believer in, is that as professionals, we don't keep all this information to ourselves, that we have the ability to be able to impart what we've learned to parents, and so that they can then bring that into their own lives. So tell us about the conference, when it is, and all of the details, whatever it is you think that's important for us to know about the speakers or the topics.
Okay, wide open there, thanks.
Go for it.
So we are really excited because it's exactly what it says on the tin, really. We're not just talking about sleep biology or, bedtime routines. It's not as boring, I don't think, as that. It's much more about, look, these are some of the things that can impact sleep. So we're taking a look at 4 key themes. So the first theme is mental health. And we've got Kathy Kendall-Tackett, who is, unashamedly got a massive professional academic crush on Kathy. I think she's fabulous. I have to say that, really, because she's my publisher. But one of the most fun things about publishing through Kathy was all the chats that we've had together. So I hugely respect her. And if you've never heard her speak on postnatal depression or postpartum depression in the US, and depression and sleep and nighttime parenting, that's what she's going to be speaking for us about. having a think about, you know, the impacts that depression has on sleep, but also the impact that sleep deprivation has on depression, because a lot of people will blame sleep deprivation on depression, but actually sometimes the depression came before the sleep. We've also got Alex Heath, who is a hypnotherapist and doula, and she is the co-founder of an amazing and just incredible technique, which I'm trained in, and it's really gathering momentum here in the UK. It's basically a technique to separate a traumatic memory from some of the current emotional responses that people get after a trauma. So it's called the 3-step rewind technique, and it's used in lots of different traumas. And she's going to be speaking to us a little bit about how trauma can develop, how trauma can present in new parents, some of the traumatic events that can be helped by this technique, and some of the easy, quick fix things that you can take away immediately. So you don't need to go and train as a practitioner to implement them. We're not like selling a whole other product through it. Alex is going to be sharing some ideas of how to manage your anxieties, your traumatic experiences, and your mental health. So that's going to be brilliant. And then we've also got a feeding theme. So the wonderful Fiona Lang-Sharp, who I also love and adore, is going to be speaking about comfort feeding. Now, comfort feeding is one of those things that people get really confused about. And I think as adults, if we think about comfort eating, we imagine somebody sitting, you know, in a chair and just kind of pigging out for the sake of it, like eating for no nutritional purposes. So it's come to mean something quite negative. And we therefore sort of project this idea of comfort eating onto a baby and think that it's something really negative. So we're going to be thinking about what that means, and also a really difficult question, which is, at what point does comfort feeding become problematic for parents? Like, is it ever a problem? And if it is, what can we do about it that's really gentle and respectful without compromising breastfeeding? So I'm really excited about that. And we've also got Amy Brown. Again, I mean, I love all these people.
Checking off all my boxes. Yes, love her. Yes, love her.
Great fun, isn't it? You know, organizing a conference, you basically think, right, who are my favorite people, and can I get them all in a room for a weekend? How much fun is that going to be? Exactly. So here we go. So Amy's going to be talking about her research about strict routines and the impact that implementing a strict routine has on an infant and also on parental mental health. So I love hearing her speak about that topic. So I'm looking forward to that. Then we have a theme about sort of the adaptation to parenthood. So we've got Kirsten Uvnesma-Berg, all hail, the oxytocin queen of the world. And she's going to be sharing some ideas about how oxytocin can be really instrumental with sleep, and how if we promote strategies that raise oxytocin, we're going to instill calm and confidence and connected parenting, and what might that look like for sleep. And Suzanne Colson is going to talk about the adaptation from womb to world and how we can ease a baby's transition from the prenatal life into extrauterine life. So that's going to be really cool as well. And then finally, we have a sleep theme. Of course, it wouldn't be a sleep conference. The sleep is going to be running throughout the whole weekend, but we've got Dagmara Dimitriou, who is a sleep researcher from University College London, and her special area of interest is sleep hygiene in children with neurodevelopmental disorders such as ASD, the autism spectrum disorder. And she's going to be talking about the psychological impact of insomnia. So that's going to be fascinating, because if you've ever struggled with sleep, you know how that gets to you on a really deep, profound level. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how sleep coaching is not new. I'm going to walk people through a kind of 300-year history of sleep modification of infants. So that's something I find really interesting. I'm not a history nerd per se, but I find it really interesting to think about the things that we've always done to try and modify infant sleep, and how that's shaped our societal views about what's normal, and what's also normal around the world is not always normal in the Western world as well. So we'll think about that.
Yeah, man, what a
So
lineup.
yeah, and we have Vic Katie, I nearly forgot. So she's a pediatrician, and she's done a lot of work with Helen Ball, who's professor of anthropology at Durham University, and they've done a lot of projects together. She's going to be talking about what pediatricians don't know about sleep, and this is really important because a lot of times when parents are struggling with sleep, the first person they'll go to is their primary doctor. But a lot of doctors actually have got very little training in sleep, especially in evidence-based gentle sleep. They've got no training in that at all. And they're still working from very dated articles and textbooks. And we need to know about that, because if we're trusting these people, then we need to know. And who better to debunk that myth than a pediatrician who knows full well.
So it would benefit pediatricians greatly to attend this conference. And you're right, it's so interesting with breastfeeding and sleep issues, not to their fault. They just really haven't had much training at all during all of their years in school. And how ironic it is that that's where new parents go to for help with those two big issues. We're going,
I know, right?
Who has very little information. So I'm thrilled about the conference for many reasons, and one of them is to offer and give and share some really good evidence-based researched information to not only parents but to health professionals, so that they can then take what they've learned and bring that to their communities too.
That's the plan. That's the plan. Yeah. So, I mean, we're excited because wherever you are in the world, you can access it. I think right now, the pound-dollar exchange rate is a little, it's a little variable. But I think the remote access option is $250 for the 2-day conference, and we have CERPs and CAPA continuing education hours applied for as well. So for the IBCLCs and doulas out there, that's helpful.
I just want to clarify. So the live streaming is while the conference is actually happening, that one can watch it at the same time.
Yeah.
Right?
If you want to get up at a strange time because it's going to be obviously GMT, so it's going to be pretty much 10 till 4:30 GMT. So I'm not anticipating that a lot of people that we've got from Australia and the US are going to be watching it live with us. I mean, if you want to, we'll make you feel so welcome, and
Right. So the option is there to watch it live stream, and
you can.
What's going to be really attractive is to be able to watch it at another time. And how long do they have to be able to watch the conference?
So we have 2 weeks, 14 days. So the reason for that is copyright issues with some of our speakers. So we can't go longer than that, sadly, but 2 weeks should be plenty enough time to catch up with the talks from the day. So so if you want that, you just choose the live stream option.
So tell me, I know you have a fun offer to my listeners. It has to do with the conference and your lovely book. So tell us what you would like to offer us. Right.
So if you are interested in the conference, then go ahead and book. So I'm assuming, unless you fancy a road trip to London, which would also be fun. I mean, come and give me a hug. Hugs are free. But I'm assuming it'll be, for a lot of people, it'll be the remote recording live stream option that you'll pick. So you go ahead, book onto that, and then send me an email to let me know you've done that. And you can email me at info@holisticsleepcoaching.com. So send me an email, let me know you've done that. the first 3 people that email me, I want to send a copy of the book to. So just in that email, just let me know your address, and I will send that to the first 3 people that pop into my inbox. So
they're great. They're going to tell you in the email that they heard about you from the All About Breastfeeding show.
Exactly.
And what is the website where they can go to register for the conference?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. That is holisticsleepcoaching.com/conference. Yeah, so we can't wait. We are really excited, and we're looking forward to seeing as many of our colleagues from around the globe there. We just want to share some really great information with you guys. So yeah.
Tell us again, did we mention when it is in March?
The 9th and 10th. Yeah, so 9th and 10th, and then 14 days after. We'll probably have, like a couple of days grace after that you can still buy the recording afterwards. I can't see a problem with that.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Lyndsey, is there anything that I perhaps didn't ask you that you would want to share with my All About Breastfeeding listeners?
Oh, I'm really grateful for your time today, Laurie. It's been lovely hanging out with you, and I just hope that it's really clear to everybody that if your baby's sleep is not bugging you, if it's bugging your mother-in-law, if it's bugging your best friend, if it's bugging, the lady across the street, like, just honestly, just smile and nod. And ignore it if you can, and find like-minded people who will support you and validate you in your gentle parenting choices. If it really is driving you mad, then rest assured there are some gentle things you can do about it, but you don't need to deal with your baby's sleep because somebody else thinks you need to deal with your baby's sleep. I guess that's what I would want everybody to know. I would love to go out of business because nobody wants to deal with sleep anymore. That would be great.
Words. I would have loved to have heard that with my first.
Amen. Me too.
Made me realize that it's okay, right? It's other people's problems. Like you said, if it's bugging other people, but it's not bugging you, then just say thank you very much for your information and lovingly walk away. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lyndsey. Appreciate your time and your knowledge. Love your book. Hope everybody goes out and gets that. And I wish you a lot of good luck with a fabulous conference.
Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing. You take care now.